Happy Birthday Big Abe by Robert Allen Burton. The most famous presidential speech in history began with the words 7 years ago. What's now been 12 year ago, 240 years, that our forefathers set forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. This is a speech many of us were taught to memorize in grade school. I think I was in 4th grade when I memorized it, but I didn't really understand it all that well then. But I understand it now, and it is as true and important today as it ever has been. What a noble idea our forefathers conceived in creating our Constitution. It is, after all, only a proposition that all men are created equal. We have all noticed that certain ethnicities excel in certain areas. Some stereotypes are based in factual statistics. Black people, on average, jump higher. Asians excel in mathematics. American Indians have the best teeth. White people, well, it's not politically correct to say that white people excel at anything, and also, myself being mostly white, it would seem arrogant anyway. But the point is that even though certain races and nationalities may in fact excel in certain areas, our forefathers believed that ultimately it all balanced out and all mankind was equal. This was the first country to ever be established under such an ideal, and so naturally it met with opposition. Brutality was occurring against Native Americans at that time, and slavery was already widespread in America. So this proposition that all men are created equal had serious opponents. Nonetheless, this Constitution was signed and became the law of the land. The Constitution also granted 3 inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You would think that at that point, brutality towards Indians and slavery would have immediately been outlawed. But a dark argument arose amongst some of the colonists, now Americans, who opposed this proposition. Their argument was that Indians and Negroes, mind you, I'm using the terminology of those times, were not fully human, therefore not people, and not entitled to all the benefits of the law. A proposition was made by those that they were determined to keep Europeans on top, and it declared Indians were only 4/5 human and 1/5 beast, while Negroes were only 3/5 human and 2/5 beast. This proposition came up with a 5-right platform. The first 3 rights being the inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The 4th right being the right to possess land, and the 5th right being the right to participate in government, running for office, and voting. Since it was decided that Indians were 4/5 human, they were allowed 4/5 of the rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the right to own land, but not allowed to participate in government. The Negroes, being considered only 3/5 human, were granted only the 3 inalienable rights, but were not allowed to own land or participate in government. What made matters worse for the blacks was that since they were not allowed to own land, it was therefore their duty to care for the land of the Europeans in order to earn their keep. Nowadays, this concept is so insulting and ridiculous that it is not included in most history books, and it never was part of the Constitution. It was, however, the unwritten law of the land used to justify the oppression of these 2 races. This concept had opponents, though, right from the beginning, both in the scientific community and in the religious community. It did not jive with what scientists had discovered about genetics. If 2 creatures can bear young together, and their young can also reproduce, that is to say, not be a genetic dead end, then they, according to scientific law, are the same species. Therefore, since whites, Negroes, and Indians can all crossbreed, they are all scientifically the same genus and species, Homo sapiens, aka human beings. So the forefront of the scientific community knew this concept was BS, but as we know, society does not always accept scientific knowledge easily. This concept met with even more fierce opposition by students of the Bible, eventually culminating in a man named John Brown adopting his own proposition to this part man, part beast concept. John Brown, a white man, suggested that some men were in fact not human, but part beast, but what determined whether one was a man or beast was not his genetics, but rather his actions. He suggested that any man who oppressed another race, namely participated in slavery, had surrendered his humanity and was a beast. Therefore, it was not against the 10 Commandments to take the life of such a beast. John Brown and his followers raided the homes of slave owners and slaughtered them, ultimately being captured after his raid of the U.S. Armory in Harper's Ferry. John Brown was hung as a terrorist against the United States of America, but by showing that he was willing to die for the cause of abolishing slavery, he became a martyr, and word spread throughout the states. Many more people began to speak out against slavery, until there were enough Americans opposed to it that they elected a president who vowed to put an end to it once and for all. We all know who that president was, and we all know what happened to him. So it took 90 years for the Constitution to take root deeply enough to overturn slavery. It took another 100 years before black people finally got all 5/5 of the law, when they finally became able to participate fully in government. Since then, social changes have occurred very rapidly. Now it is becoming evident that there is a new oppression sweeping the land. Racism still occurs against all races to some degree. But the racism that is presently politically correct is racism against the white man. It is acceptable for races to create their own schools, their own funds, their own television channels, their own nationally broadcast award ceremonies, as long as that race is not white. White people are not the only race who have to endure negative stereotypes, but they are taking the worst of it in mainstream media, which widely broadcasts statements such as white people have no rhythm, white people have no soul, and white people are often portrayed as dorks in general for the sake of television humor. Perhaps it is a natural backlash to so many years of oppression, but the young people who are victim to these racial slurs and negative stereotypes are innocent of any of the crimes that took place before their birth. Until we have a nation that does not tolerate oppression of any race, we will not have achieved what our forefathers sought for, nor will we have achieved what Martin Luther King dreamed. Here we stand on a battlefield of that war, testing whether this nation or any other nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, can long endure.